The wind drove fine dust against May Callan's skirts as she climbed the long rise toward the Rourke Ranch. Her boots were worn through at the toes and the hem of her dress was rimmed with clay. The prairie stretched behind her like a faded quilt, brown, brittle, and endless. Somewhere far off a windmill creaked. She kept walking. She'd buried her husband the previous spring under a cottonwood tree near a dry creek bed. The land they'd tried to farm had turned to dust. The well had gone bad and the cattle had been sold for half their worth. With the last of her savings, she'd bought a mule and wagon, hoping to find work before winter. Now even the mule was gone, traded for a few days' food and a promise of shelter. All she had left was a faded bonnet, a tin cross in her pocket, and the will to knock on one more door. From the hilltop she saw the ranch, timber house, wide porch, corrals, and a barn, weathered silver. Smoke rose from the chimney. A dog barked once and went quiet. It looked like a place that had forgotten laughter. May tightened her shawl and started down. When she reached the porch, she hesitated. She'd knocked on plenty of doors before, and most had shut just as quickly. Folks saw a widow alone and thought either trouble or pity. Still, her belly was empty and pride didn't fill it. She raised her hand and knocked. The door opened slowly. Wyatt Rourke stood there, tall and broad-shouldered. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hair was dark, his eyes the gray of a storm about to break. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "You lost?" "No, sir." "I heard you might need a cook," she said, her voice steady though her knees trembled. His gaze flicked past her to the empty trail. "Where's your husband?" "Gone," she said softly. "I'm on my own." He studied her face as if weighing her words. Then he nodded once, curt. "Kitchen's that way," he said, turning aside. "I can pay a fair wage. Don't expect to talk. I got work, not company." May stepped inside. The house smelled of dust and cold ashes. A single chair was pulled up to a table set for one. The clock on the wall had stopped, its hands pointing to 12. She set her small bundle on the floor and took in the silence. "Where do you keep your flour?" she asked. He motioned toward a cupboard. "Haven't used it in a while." She found a sack half full and a jar of salt. Without asking, she began mixing dough. He watched her for a moment, then went out to the porch, his boots creaking on the boards. By sundown, the smell of bread filled the house. Wyatt came back in, hat in hand, almost sheepish. "Didn't think that oven still worked," he said. May gave a faint smile. It just needed tending. They ate quietly. Outside, the dog barked again, this time at the wind. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. For the first time in months, May felt the edge of warmth, a fragile piece like a candle catching. When the meal was done, she wiped the table and said, "I'll sleep near the stove if that's all right. I won't be any bother." Wyatt hesitated, then nodded. "Suit yourself. Just don't expect chatter. This house needs warmth, not noise." May looked up at him, understanding more than he said. "Yes, Mr. Rourke," she answered quietly. Outside, the wind sighed through the prairie grass. Inside, two silences, hers and his, met in the dim light, neither knowing yet how the other would change the shape of the days to come. Morning light crept through the cracks of the shutters, soft and pale. May rose before the rooster called, her body stiff from the hard floor beside the stove. She brushed the ashes from her skirts and began stirring the coals to life. The warmth spread slowly, chasing the chill from the room. Wyatt Rourke came in with his hat low and his boots wet from dew. He nodded toward her but said nothing. His silence was not cruel, only heavy, like a man who'd forgotten how to speak unless there was work to discuss. He poured water from the pitcher and washed his face, then looked at the table already set with biscuits and coffee. "You've been up long?" he asked. "Not long enough," she said with a faint smile. "There's stew for supper if the beans soften right." He blinked as though surprised by her answer, then gave a short grunt of approval. "You work quietly. I like that." The days fell into rhythm. May cooked, cleaned, and mended. Wyatt tended cattle and fences, returning each evening bone-tired and dusted gray. At first they barely spoke. But slowly the silence began to change its shape. Less cold, more steady. One afternoon, a pair of ranch hands stopped by to deliver feed. They found May hanging laundry in the yard, her sleeves rolled up, hair pinned neat. One of the men, Tom Avery, tipped his hat with a grin. "Didn't know the boss had taken on help that pretty," he said loud enough for the other to hear. May didn't answer. She kept pinning the shirts to the line, the breeze snapping them straight. Wyatt came from the barn then, his face hard as cut stone. "You boys got mouths for work or gossip?" Tom's grin faltered. "Just passing a word, Mr. Rourke." "Then pass on out," Wyatt said. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of warning. The men tipped their hats again and rode off, laughing low between themselves. That evening at supper, May spoke without looking up. "They'll talk worse in town." "They always do," Wyatt frowned. "What's that mean?" "It means," she said, folding her hands, "a widow working under a man's roof makes for easy stories. They'll say I'm after your money or your name. It's what they said before, back when my husband died." He leaned back in his chair. "You came for work, not charity. That's plain to me. Don't worry over fools." But trouble had a way of finding its own path. By the week's end, word reached the small settlement, by the river, that the Rourke Ranch had hired a young widow with eyes like smoke, and that she'd moved in properly. The talk grew meaner with every retelling. May heard it first at the general store when she went for flour. The shopkeeper's wife gave her a tight smile. "You and Mr. Rourke must be keeping each other good company out there," she said. May's hand stilled on the counter. "I cook, I clean. That's all." The woman's smile didn't soften. "Surely." By the time May rode back with the supplies, her stomach twisted. Wyatt noticed her quiet, though she said nothing. That night she laid the bread on the table and asked, "Would it trouble you if I left?" He looked up, startled. "You want to leave because of the talk?" "I don't want to shame your name," she said. "You gave me work when no one else would." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. They don't feed my stock or pay my bills. You stay." May met his gaze, something uncertain flickering there. Fear, perhaps, or a fragile kind of trust. "As you wish, Mr. Rourke," she murmured. Outside, coyotes yipped under a cold moon. Inside, two people sat in lamplight. Both fighting ghosts neither could yet name, bound now by words that would soon set half the valley whispering. The days grew colder, and frost began to cling to the fence rails. May worked without complaint, though the air between her and Wyatt carried a quiet strain, like a string pulled too tight. The gossip hadn't stopped. It only shifted from whispers to open talk. At the feed store, men chuckled when Wyatt walked in. "Heard you got yourself a wife you didn't have to court," one said, slapping his knee. Wyatt ignored him at first, but the man pressed on. "You always did like a soft hand at home, didn't you, Rourke?" Wyatt turned slowly, his eyes gray and cold. "Say that again," he said. The laughter died quickly. The man muttered something about no harm meant, but Wyatt's stare followed him until he left. He finished his business in silence, jaw tight enough to crack stone. Back at the ranch, May noticed the storm in his eyes. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing that needs telling," he said, though the way he slammed the door said otherwise. That night, he ate in silence. May watched him, her hand still on the table. "They're blaming me," she said finally. "The talk won't stop until I'm gone." "You think leaving will stop it?" Wyatt asked, looking up at her. "They'll just find someone else to drag through the mud. Let 'em choke on their own lies." But she could see how his shoulders bore it, how each rumor laid another stone on his back. A week later, the banker, Mr. Haldren, rode up in a fine buggy, coat buttoned to his throat. His smile was thin as paper. "Afternoon, Rourke," he said. "I came to review the loan accounts. Seems you're behind on interest again." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "That's not due for another month." Haldren tapped the papers. The date was changed. New schedule. Bank policy? May stood on the porch, drying her hands on her apron, listening. "Funny," Wyatt said, his voice low. How that policy shows up now after all these years on time? Haldren shrugged. Things change. And I hear talk, about a widow living here. A man's reputation affects his credit, Mr. Rourke. Just looking out for your interests. May's face burned. She wanted to speak, but Wyatt stepped forward, his voice sharp as wire. You come here to talk about money or gossip? Both touch each other, Haldren said, smiling thinly. Settle the interest or the bank reclaims what's owed. He tipped his hat and drove off, leaving dust in his wake. May stood frozen. He means to ruin you, she said quietly. Wyatt didn't answer. He looked out over his land, the pastures stretching pale beneath the sun. He'll try, he said at last, but I won't give him what he wants. That evening, May packed her shawl. Wyatt saw her by the stove and frowned. Are you running again? I should never have come. If I stay, I'll cost you your ranch. He stepped closer, voice rough but steady. You think this place matters more than decency? You've done nothing wrong. I've done enough by being seen, she whispered. People don't need proof to believe the worst. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not leaving, he said, not as a command but a promise. The next morning, when the ranch hands came by, they found May hanging laundry again and Wyatt chopping wood. Tom Avery, the same man who'd mocked before, glanced between them and muttered, He's planning to marry her, mark my words. I need a reason to keep her here. By evening, that guess had turned into truth all across town. At Sunday service, the preacher himself paused mid-sermon, his eyes landing hard on the Rourke's empty pew. Temptation wears many faces, he said, voice sharp, and sin dressed as duty is still sin. May wasn't there to hear it, but she felt the weight of it all the same, as if the whole prairie had turned against her. May stayed mostly inside after that Sunday. She cleaned until her hands ached, trying to scrub away the echo of those whispered words. The ranch felt smaller each day, the walls closing in with the weight of other people's judgment. Wyatt came and went, quieter than ever. He worked long hours mending fences that didn't need fixing. Sometimes she watched him through the window, his shoulders squared against the wind, every movement carrying the same stubborn pride that kept the house standing. Late one afternoon, a knock came at the door. May wiped her hands and opened it to find the preacher standing there, hat in hand, his face set like carved oak. Mrs. Callan, he said, voice flat. I'd like a word. Wyatt appeared behind her. If you've got words, you can speak them plain, he said. The preacher nodded, eyes cold. It's not fitting. A woman living under a man's roof with no family between them. The town's losing patience. I came to give a warning before someone takes it upon himself to demand answers. May gripped the doorframe. I came here for work, not sin, she said quietly. The preacher's gaze didn't soften. Then you do well to leave before your presence brings ruin on both of you. Wyatt stepped forward. You forget yourself, Reverend. This is my land, my house. You don't decide who belongs here. The preacher met his stare for a long moment. A man's pride can blind him. Think about that. He turned and walked away, leaving his boots' prints deep in the dust. May closed the door and leaned against it, trembling. Wyatt's voice came low. He's got no right, none at all. Maybe not, she said, but he's not wrong about what people will do. That night, May couldn't sleep. The wind scratched at the shutters and the fire burned low. She remembered another night years ago, the night her husband had been killed in a saloon brawl. Folks had said then, too, that she'd tempted him into ruin, that a woman's place was quiet and unseen. The same kind of talk that now followed her here. By morning, she'd made up her mind to leave. She packed her shawl and the small wooden cross she kept by her bed. But when she opened the door, Wyatt stood there, blocking the way. Going somewhere? He asked. I can't stay, she said. You'll lose everything because of me. He shook his head. No, I've already lost enough. I won't let a pack of cowards tell me who I can feed under my roof. Wyatt, please. But he reached out, stopping her hand. You're not the cause of this trouble, May. You're the only thing keeping this house alive. She looked up at him then, really looked. The hard lines around his mouth, the quiet sorrow in his eyes. The distance between them felt thinner than air. For a moment neither spoke. A knock shattered the silence. It was Tom Avery again, hat in hand, his face uneasy. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "the preacher's been talking to the banker. They're stirring folk up, saying if you don't set things straight properly, by marriage or dismissal, they'll petition the sheriff about moral conduct." Wyatt's jaw clenched. They think they can shame a woman out of her bread? Tom glanced at May, shame flickering across his face. "It's worse than that, sir. They're planning to come tomorrow, to ask you both in front of witnesses what your intentions are." May felt her knees weaken. The preacher's warning wasn't just words. It was a storm on the horizon, rolling closer by the hour. Wyatt looked out across the fading light toward the town. "Then let them come," he said quietly. "I've got my own truth to tell." But deep down, May knew truth didn't always save anyone. It only showed who was brave enough to stand by it. The next day it was gray and still. Not a breeze stirred the grass. May could feel the weight of what was coming, heavy as a storm before lightning. She kept her hands busy kneading dough, though her thoughts spun like dust devils. By noon, riders appeared on the horizon, 3 men on horseback and the preacher's buggy behind them. Wyatt stood on the porch, arms folded, waiting. He didn't dress for Sunday, but he'd cleaned his boots and combed his hair, as if respect mattered even in battle. When the riders stopped, the preacher climbed down, flanked by the banker, Mr. Haldren, and 2 town elders. May watched from the doorway, her heart thudding. "Mr. Rourke," the preacher said, "we've come for decency's sake. The town can't abide scandal. You've a woman under your roof with no kin to speak for her. This must be set right." Wyatt's voice was calm. "You all know why she's here. She works. She earns her keep. That's more than I can say for half the men whispering her name in the saloon." Haldren smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Now, let's not make this unpleasant. You could fix this with a simple choice, send her away or make her a wife. Either clears the talk." May stepped forward, hands clenched. "You'd have me punished just to quiet your gossip?" The preacher's gaze hardened. "This isn't about gossip, Mrs. Callan, it's about morals." Her voice broke, but not from fear. "You speak of morals, yet you'd cast me out to starve. You of all men should know what that costs." The preacher's jaw tightened, his composure slipping. "Don't you speak of what you don't understand." Wyatt's eyes flicked between them. "What's this really about?" he asked. May's breath came shallow. She turned toward the preacher, her voice trembling but clear. "Tell him, Reverend. Tell him why you've wanted me gone since the day I arrived." Silence fell. Even the horses shifted uneasily. The preacher's face darkened. "You were to marry my son," he said bitterly, "before you shamed him." May's voice caught. "Your son, Samuel, died in a saloon fight because he drew his gun on a gambler. I begged him not to go. You know that. You ruined him," the preacher snapped. "He lost his faith chasing you, and I buried him because of it." The truth hung there, raw and heavy. Wyatt stared at the preacher, then at May. "So that's why you've been hounding her." "This ain't about sin, it's revenge." The preacher said nothing. Haldren, sensing the turn, cleared his throat. "Let's keep to business. Whether or not her past is shameful, the town's patience is short. My advice? Settle the matter before the sheriff hears word." Wyatt's gaze sharpened. "And I suppose you'd like that. You'd get my ranch once the law calls me unfit." Haldren gave a thin chuckle. "Only what's due, Mr. Rourke. A man's debts don't care about his pride." May stepped forward, her voice like steel under the tremor. "My late husband dealt with your bank, Mr. Haldren. I remember the ledgers. He always said some numbers didn't match." Haldren waved her off. "You're mistaken, madam." "Maybe," she said. "But I kept his papers. Everyone." Wyatt looked at her, surprise flickering across his face. Haldren's smirk faltered for the first time. "Old papers prove nothing," he said quickly. "Good day to you both." He turned his buggy and left, the preacher behind him, face pale with fury. When the dust settled, May and Wyatt stood in silence. Finally, he said, You held that secret all this time? May nodded. My husband died before he could use them. I thought they were worthless until today. Wyatt's eyes met hers, steady and sure. Then maybe we've got more than gossip to fight with now. That evening the sky turned the color of old copper. A storm brewed somewhere over the ridge, but May hardly noticed. Her thoughts were fixed on the box she'd pulled from under her bed. A small tin chest, the edges dented, the latch rusted from years of handling. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied with faded ribbon. Wyatt sat at the table, watching her hands tremble as she untied the knot. You sure those are what you think they are? He asked. May nodded slowly. My husband used to keep ledgers for the bank when work was short. Said Mr. Haldren was cooking numbers, charging interest that wasn't owed, changing dates after folks signed. I told him to turn it over to the sheriff, but he never got the chance. Wyatt leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as she spread the papers. The handwriting was neat and careful, the figures marked with dates and signatures. These match the ones he used on my loan, he muttered. Same pen stroke, same lie. He rubbed his jaw, thinking, if we take this to the sheriff, Haldren's done for. May hesitated. You really think the sheriff will listen? The banker's got half the town owing him. He'll twist the truth before it leaves our mouths. Maybe, Wyatt said, standing. But lies can't hide forever. For the first time in weeks, May saw something new in his face. Not anger, not sorrow, but purpose. The kind of steady courage she'd almost forgotten existed in men. They spent hours sorting the papers, marking the ones that mattered most. Outside rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. May paused once, looking up at Wyatt as lightning flashed across his face. You don't have to do this for me, she said. He looked up from the table. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because right's right. You just gave me reason to remember. His words warmed something inside her that had long gone cold. The next morning, Wyatt saddled his horse and packed the documents into a leather pouch. May followed him to the porch, pulling her shawl tight. Be careful, she said. Haldren won't stand still while you ruin him. Wyatt gave a faint smile. Let him try. He paused, meeting her eyes. If I'm not back by sundown, pack what you need and head to the garrison place. Old Ruth there owes me a favor. I'll be waiting, May said, her throat tightening. He rode off through the wet fields, the mist swallowing him by the time he reached the road. All that day, May tried to work, but her hands wouldn't steady. She baked, swept, mended, and listened. Every sound from the hills made her heart jump. The clock ticked slowly, the minutes dragging heavy as stones. By late afternoon, hoofbeats echoed from beyond the creek. She rushed to the porch, her breath catching. Wyatt appeared, hat-soaked, his coat spattered with mud, but his eyes were all right. You did it? She asked. He nodded, swinging down from his horse. The sheriff looked at the papers himself. Said Haldren's been robbing half the county blind. He's sending for a judge from Carson City. May pressed a hand to her mouth. Then it's over? Wyatt shook his head. Not yet. Haldren's got friends, and men like him don't go down quietly, but the sheriff's watching him now. Lightning flashed again and thunder rolled close behind. Wyatt turned toward the door. Best we stay inside tonight. Something tells me this storm's not all weather. As night settled, May sat near the window, watching rain pour over the land that had once seemed so endless and cruel. Now it looked washed clean, like something waiting to begin again. And in the faint light of the hearth, she saw Wyatt across the room, quiet, strong, and tired, but looking at her as if for the first time, seeing not a burden, but someone worth standing beside. The storm lasted all night. Rain hammered the roof like fists, and thunder shook the windows. May sat by the fire, her shawl wrapped tight, while Wyatt checked the door latches and kept his rifle nearby. He didn't say it out loud, but she knew what he feared, that Haldren wouldn't wait for the law. By morning, the world was gray and still. Water pooled in the yard, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Wyatt stepped outside, scanning the empty road. Too quiet, he muttered. May joined him, her skirts brushing the damp boards. You think they'll come? Wouldn't be the first time a man tried to fix his troubles with a gun, he said. But I'll be ready. Before noon, hoofbeats echoed again, this time not one but several. Wyatt's hand went to his belt. 5 riders came into view, led by Haldren himself. The banker wore a long coat, his face pale but smug. Behind him rode 2 hired guns and the preacher holding his Bible like a badge. Stay inside, Wyatt said quietly. May shook her head. I won't hide. The riders stopped in front of the porch. Haldren dismounted slowly. Mr. Rourke, he called out, voice slick with false courtesy. Seems we have unfinished business. Wyatt stood firm. Sheriff's got your ledgers. Best turn yourself in before he sends men this way. Haldren laughed. You think one pile of paper changes anything? That sheriff's my cousin's man. By the time he moves, I'll have your land as payment for your false claims. You forged half the county's loans, Wyatt said. That won't vanish in the rain. Haldren's eyes flicked toward May. And as for you, Mrs. Callan, funny how you always end up near dead men in trouble. Maybe I should remind everyone how convenient your timing's been. May stepped forward. You stole my husband's land and called it debt. You killed his hope long before he died. Haldren smirked. And what'll you do about it, widow? Bake me bread? Before Wyatt could move, one of Haldren's men raised his rifle. Boss? He asked, waiting for the order. Don't, Wyatt warned, his own gun drawn now. You fire that thing, you'll answer to me, and to the law that's already after you. For a tense moment, no one breathed. Then thunder rolled again, sharp and near. The horses stamped nervously. The preacher stepped forward, his voice trembling. Enough, put your weapons down. This isn't God's way. Haldren glared at him. You stay out of this, Reverend. You've had your say and your sermons. This is business, but the preacher didn't move back. No, he said quietly. It's sin. And I've had my share of it already. His eyes flicked to May. I was wrong to judge her. My anger blinded me. Haldren spat in the mud. You're a fool, same as her. At that, Wyatt's patience broke. He stepped down from the porch, boots sinking into the wet ground. You've got 2 choices, Haldren. Ride out and face the sheriff like a man, or push this and see who buries whom. Haldren's smile faltered. He saw something in Wyatt's eyes, something unshakable. You'll regret crossing me, he hissed. Already did, Wyatt said, steady as a rock. The banker swung up onto his horse. Come on, he snapped to his men. We'll let the law handle this for now. They rode off into the mist, their shapes swallowed by rain. The preacher lingered, hat in hand. I'll go to the sheriff myself, he said softly. This time I'll tell the truth. When he left, silence settled again. May let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Wyatt holstered his gun and looked at her, weary but calm. It's not over, he said. But the worst of the storm has passed. May nodded, her heart still racing. Maybe, she whispered. But storms have a way of coming back. Days passed with slow quiet. The rain stopped and the land began to dry. The creek ran high but clean, washing away old tracks and ash. May hung wet blankets on the porch rail while Wyatt mended a broken fence post. The air felt lighter, but something in both of them stayed tense, like the storm had left its echo behind. News from town came through a drifter. The sheriff had arrested Haldren after finding the hidden ledgers. The preacher's statement sealed the case. Folks whispered again, but this time their talk was about justice. Wyatt didn't say much when he heard. He just nodded once and went back to work. That evening, May cooked a small meal, cornbread, beans, and what was left of the salt pork. The table was plain, but when Wyatt sat down across from her, it felt like the first quiet meal they'd shared without a shadow between them. You'll be free of him now, Wyatt said after a while. No man can hold that debt over you anymore. May folded her hands in her lap. Freedom's strange. I thought I'd feel lighter, but mostly I just feel empty. He looked at her for a long time. You lost more than land. Takes time to fill what grief hollows out. She nodded, her throat tight. The firelight moved across his face, stern but gentle, and she thought again of the night he'd found her at his door. Something had shifted since then, something she couldn't name. Later, when the dishes were done, she went outside. The sky was wide and full of stars. The air smelled of pine and wet dirt. Behind her, the cabin glowed softly from the fire inside. Wyatt joined her after a minute, standing a few steps away. "You'll stay on till spring," he said, more like a statement than a question. "If you'll have me," she answered quietly. He nodded. "You've done this place better than I have in years. Feels less empty with you here." She smiled a little. "You say that you didn't build it with your own hands." "Doesn't mean it was home," he said. May looked at him then, really looked. The man who had once lived behind silence and routine was letting something soften in him. She saw it in the way his shoulders eased and how his voice lost its edge. "You know," she said softly, "my husband used to say a home isn't walls or boards. It's the sound of someone breathing beside you at night." Wyatt turned toward her, eyes steady. He was right. They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the wind move through the pines. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled. The next morning, Wyatt rode into town to see the sheriff and confirm Haldren's arrest. May stayed behind, tending to chores. When she went to the barn to gather eggs, she found a small wooden box near the door. Wyatt's old keepsake chest. Inside lay a silver locket and a folded note. The note read, "For what's been lost and what might still be found." She touched the locket. It held a picture of a woman and a baby, both long gone. Wyatt's wife and child. May's eyes stung as she closed the lid. The man who never spoke of the past had just shared it without a word. That evening, when he returned, she didn't mention the box. She only handed him a cup of coffee and said, "Welcome home." He paused, the word home settling between them like a promise. Outside, the world was quiet. The storm had stripped the land clean, but in that quiet, something new was taking root. Something fragile and good. And though neither said it aloud, both knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The West never lets things rest easy, but for now it was enough. The peace didn't hold long. By next week, the banker's brother, a man named Clyde Haldren, rode into town swearing vengeance. He was loud, red-faced, and full of drink. The townsfolk tried to quiet him, but his anger spilled over every fence and street corner. He said May Callan had framed his brother. He said Wyatt Rourke had used forged papers to steal land that wasn't his. The rumors traveled fast. By sundown, even the preacher heard the talk, and the sheriff sent word to the ranch asking Wyatt to come into town and clear things before the crowd got mean. May stood in the doorway as Wyatt saddled his horse. "You shouldn't go alone," she said. He tied the cinch and glanced up. "If I don't face them, the lies will grow. You stay here. Lock the door till I'm back." Her heart thudded hard. "You think they'll listen?" He gave a thin smile. "Don't need them to listen. Just need them to see what the truth looks like." He rode out as the light faded, the sound of hoofbeats rolling like thunder across the hills. When Wyatt reached town, a small crowd waited near the livery. The sheriff stood between them and the saloon, hand resting near his holster. Clyde Haldren pushed forward, waving a folded paper. "You think you can shame my brother and steal his name clean?" Clyde shouted. "These papers prove he never owed you a dime." Wyatt dismounted slowly. "Is that so?" "Let's see him." Clyde tossed the paper toward him. It was a debt note, rough and yellowed. Wyatt looked it over, then held it up to the lantern light. The signature was crooked, the ink too fresh. "This was written last week," Wyatt said evenly. "Funny thing for a man who's been in the sheriff's cell that whole time." The sheriff stepped closer, eyeing the page. "He's right. That's not the banker's handwriting." Clyde's face flushed. "You calling me a liar?" Wyatt didn't flinch. "I'm saying lies don't fix what your brother broke," the crowd murmured. Someone spat in the dust. Tension hung like a stretched wire. Then May's voice rang from behind them. "He doesn't have to prove anything." She'd ridden down from the ranch, bonnet tied tight, her shawl snapping in the wind. She held up a small book, the ledger she'd found weeks ago. These pages hold every deal your brother made, Clyde. Every false loan. Every theft. You want to know how I got them? Your brother kept them hidden from his own men. She opened to a page, the ink smudged but clear. The sheriff leaned close, reading the dates. His brow furrowed. This is enough to keep him in jail for years. Clyde lunged forward, but Wyatt stepped between them. That's enough. His voice was low, but it carried. Your family's taken enough from hers. Let it end here. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the sheriff raised his hand. Clyde Haldren, you're under arrest for tampering and false accusation. The crowd broke into murmurs again, some angry, some relieved. Clyde cursed and fought, but the deputies dragged him away. May stood still, breathing hard, the ledger clutched to her chest. Wyatt turned to her. You shouldn't have come. I couldn't stay behind, she said. You took me in when no one would. I wasn't about to let them tear you down alone. He stared at her for a long moment, dust swirling between them, the lantern light flickering gold in her eyes. You're braver than anyone gives you credit for. May's voice trembled. So are you. The sheriff tipped his hat toward them both. You two head home. I'll see this town remembers what right looks like. As they rode back under a sky full of stars, May felt the weight on her chest ease. For once the road ahead looked clear, and beside her Wyatt's silence wasn't distant anymore. It was peace. Spring came slowly but steadily. The hills turned green again and the creek ran clear. Wildflowers pushed up through the scorched earth as if the land itself wanted to begin again. May hung fresh curtains in the kitchen that morning. They fluttered in the soft wind, bright against the window glass. The house smelled of bread and soap, not dust. The sound of a hymn drifted from the porch where Wyatt sat, tuning an old guitar he hadn't touched in years. The town's talk had finally gone quiet. Clyde Haldren had been taken east to face trial, and the sheriff sent word that the ranch deed was now clean, free of all false claims. For the first time in a long while, the Rourke place belonged to peace. May stepped outside, drying her hands on her apron. Have you ever played for anyone before? She asked. Wyatt gave a half smile. I used to play for my wife, back when I still believed the house could hold music. She leaned against the post. Seems it can again. He strummed a few slow notes, rough but warm. The sound carried across the pasture, touching the air like memory. He looked up at her. Are you thinking of staying on? She hesitated. I told myself I'd leave once the work was done. But every time I pack my things, I keep finding one more chore. He set the guitar aside and stood. Maybe that's because you're not meant to leave. May smiled, but there was a tremor in it. You don't owe me anything, Wyatt. You gave me work when no one else would. He shook his head. I didn't give you anything. You gave this place back its life. You gave me reason to open the door again. For a moment the wind was the only sound. Then he said quietly, May, when you first knocked, I told you this house needed warmth, not chatter. I was wrong. It needed you. She swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. You don't need to say things you'll regret. I won't regret the truth, he said. I need a cook, yes, but I also need someone who'll stand beside me when the ground shakes. Someone who knows how to make a home out of ashes. May looked at him, really looked, and saw no pity in his face, only steady light. She stepped closer, the porch boards creaking under her feet. And what if I say I'm done being a servant? Then I'll say, he answered, voice low, you're the mistress of this house, if you'll have it. For the first time since her husband's death, May laughed, soft and broken but real. Are you asking me plain, Mr. Rourke? He smiled faintly. As plain as a man can. She nodded, tears spilling now, her voice shaking like new leaves. Then yes, I'll stay, not as a worker. As to what this place has been missing. Wyatt took her hands, rough palms meeting rough palms. The wind carried the scent of rain and wild sage. In the distance, the bell from the church in town rang once, clear and slow like a blessing. Later that day, the ranch hands came by to help mend the east fence. When they saw May standing beside Wyatt, both smiling, They said nothing, just tipped their hats and went to work. The gossip was over. The silence between man and woman had turned into something the whole valley could feel: steadiness, peace, and earned love. That evening, the table was set for two. The dog slept by the fire. May poured coffee, the same hands that once knocked on this door now sure of their place. Wyatt sat opposite her, watching the flame dance across her face. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and gold in the setting sun. Inside, laughter replaced the old hush. The house that once knew only grief had found its song again. And as the night settled softly over the land, the rancher reached for her hand. No words, no promises, just the quiet knowing that this, at last, was home. If you felt this story in your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales for more Wild West love and redemption stories. Your support helps keep these frontier voices alive.